Hi, folks. I'm Jeff Ragusa, Channel Manager on the Google Apps team. I'm joined by Anna Smith-Cortez, another Channel Manager, and Patricia Spears from the Google Apps team. And then we also have Michelle Lazowski from our partner marketing team who's been hosting these webinars. So they will each and all be chiming in from time to time. We want to try something a little bit different in this session. We've had lots of interest from customers and from our Google Apps resellers in our Postini services, Google Message Security and Google Message Discovery in particular. And it's an area where we haven't been very extensive with our partner-facing material or communication. So we'll have pointers later as to where you can get further information on this. But generally, activation and administration of these Postini services are non-trivial, and you can get yourself into trouble, and by extension, you can get your clients into trouble if you sort of don't know what you're doing. So we wanted to create a webinar on these issues, and that's what we're going to run through today. But as I mentioned, we want to try something a little bit different this time. We wanted to bring in one of our Google Apps partners, Horizon Info Services, who is specializing in Postini services and has been doing so for a long while. We really want to have them host and run a presentation here as the subject matter expert. So we've got Chris Caldwell and Alan Falcon from Horizon, who will run through some slides and also take questions on the topic. So I am going to hand off to Michelle for some logistics, and then we'll pass off to Chris and Alan.
Thanks, Jeff. So just a reminder to everyone, this webinar, as well as all our past webinars, are posted on the Solution Provider site. We're recording, and we'll post that and the presentation and the webinar archive section. And I'll also follow up with everyone you registered via email after this webinar, sending you a link. Give us till about the end of the day to get the recording ready. Also, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are going to be taking questions throughout the presentation. Please make sure you use the Q&A chat box in the bottom right corner of the screen and not the chat box above it. By putting your questions in the Q&A chat box, it's going to help us keep track of all of them and make sure that Alan and Chris see them so we can try to address all questions during the webinar. That's it for today. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alan and Chris. Alan and Chris, you guys should have control over the presentation now.
We do. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is Alan Falcon. I'm here with Chris Caldwell, and our objective for today is to provide useful information about Google Postini Services that come with Google Apps Premier Edition, both Google Message Security, but also a very short discussion about Message Discovery, the archive and discovery tool as well. And for the majority of the presentation, I'm going to hand it off to Chris Caldwell.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for attending today. Our goals, as Alan has mentioned, is to provide an overview to perhaps demystify some of the Postini services and provide an introduction and some of the challenges with Google Message Discovery. The bulk of the conversation will be about message security as an option through Google Apps Premier Edition. And we hope to touch on areas and provide some best practices and recommendations that will be good for you as you move forward with your clients, give you additional opportunities, and help you feel more comfortable about the services and how they add value to Gabe. Google Message Security is a very robust service, offers real-time spam and virus protection. That's a service that in the real-time aspect, I think, is a key differentiator here. It's updated all day long by engineers that are monitoring spam services. The viruses are updated so frequently that you just can't match that on a traditional server-based updates cycle. The service provides some network performance, although you probably wouldn't necessarily notice it if you're using Gape because of all of the bandwidth potential that Google has. It offers spooling as a background service to prevent mail loss or mail bounces should the service be interrupted. Google Message Discovery is a superset of that. It includes Google Message Security and provides compliance archiving, centralized repository, no practical limits to the amount of mail that can be archived, anywhere from 1 to 10 years worth of compliance-based archive, and the ability to do searches and litigation holds and the types of things that are certainly newsworthy these days. Let's focus on Google Message Security and talk a little bit about some of the features, why, as provided through Google Apps. Certainly, spam and virus protection, in addition to what Google Apps already offers. It's done before Google Apps, cloud-based solution, patented algorithm, industry leader, multiple virus filtering going on here, plus some additional controls that you won't see through Google Apps, the ability to do filtering by attachment types, the ability to set special content filters to adjust your spam, the ability for users to self-manage or for administrators to manage, the ability for outbound mail, reporting, and a variety of options which help to administer both small and large domains. Flexible service and really a value add for you if you're upgrading clients that are on Standard Edition. Here's another reason to consider the value of Premier Edition. Google Message Discovery, just as a service overview, includes everything that you would get with the Google Apps Postini Services option, but layers into that, again, the archive, retention, discovery, recovery, all of those features, hosted architecture, very secure in terms of compliance-based record retention, the ability to recover and do litigation holds and searches. Audit trails are all built into this service, so very robust opportunity that works hand in hand with Google Message Security and can be equally adapted to work with Google Apps Premier. Wanted to spend some time going through Google Message Security and how it's activated as a component of Google Apps. There's really 4 phases that we'll be addressing here. Activation of the service, administration of the service from a couple of perspectives, considerations for educating your users, and what do you do when there are issues with spam flow, with service configuration, and so on. So let's dive into the activation phase of it.
Brief overview.
As
an overview, we look at the Postini Services and the GMS administration within Premier Edition in 2 ways. There's the basic configuration that you want for all of your customers, involving the white and black lists, setting up your spam and virus filters either globally or by org or by user, deciding how you're going to manage the quarantines and the daily email summaries, any domain aliases, and then probably we recommend generating reports to show them the value of this additional component to Google Apps Premier Edition. If the needs of your customers are more advanced, you can start looking at outbound services, more advanced user and group management, content management for custom filters or attachment filters based on attachment type, and that works both inbound and outbound, as well as encryption and the policy-enforced TLS.
Some considerations before you activate Postini Services through your Google Apps console. One, you've probably already done this when you've activated the service, but if there's been any time there, you want to make sure you have access to DNS because you will have to change MX records. A key differentiator here, if there's any opportunity or interest from the client to introduce message discovery, you don't want to activate Postini Services through your Google Apps console because it gets the domain listed and you have to actually delist it to provision that service through through a reseller. If you're going direct, there are different opportunities there, but you want to be careful in that decision process. And a smaller but significant point on the ability to rapidly implement the service, if you have the opportunity when working with your MX records to set the TTL, the time to live, to as low as possible, it will help the propagation of the service. It just allows you to move the whole process from beginning to end a lot more rapidly. It may not be an option that's available to you. Once they're set to and operating correctly, you can set them back to the recommended cycle, which Google is, and for most, is actually a week or something more. Typically, it's somewhere less than that. Activation is a multi-step process. There's a wizard within the control panel that is that implements the steps involved in activating the service. It's not something that you can do through the reseller portal. You have to do it with an administrator account from one of the users in your client's domain, and this is largely because of the license acceptance issues. You know, the majority of these steps are very simple. Configuration in the cPanel, you're going to accept the license. There's a registration process where behind the scenes the service is provisioned and set up to go. And once that's done, you're notified via email. The administrator is notified via email, and you can change the MX records to begin mail flow through Postini. The wizard does a very fine job of setting up everything you need to have the service operational. It includes synchronization of users and groups and settings. The default settings are sufficient to take advantage of the additional spam virus filtering from the get-go, but there's lots of customization that we can and will address. Wanted to take a minute to step through that activation process. You know, right now, when you first provision a Google Apps Premier account, it's not Postini Services is not listed in the services on the cPanel. You can bring it to the front by adding more services and adding Postini Services. That does not activate it, but it makes it available for you to decide to activate it. When you want to activate the service, you'll start the wizard process by clicking on the Activate Service. You'll go through a license acceptance, and again, this has to be done as an administrator. You can't do it through the reseller portal. Once you've activated the license, it will go through a registration process. Typically, it takes about an hour. The administrator account that you're logged into will receive an email. Once that step has been done, you go back into the control panel. You'll see the next step of the wizard to push through the MX changes and what you need to do there, and then tell the service that it's done, and that will complete the setup and the provisioning of the service. You can access the Postini Services console from the control panel through the link that's listed at the bottom of the screen. Under Postini Services is a link to get to the Postini Services console, it's accessed using single sign-on. So even though it's a separate website and it's not one of the let's say, normal Google Apps services, it's still accessing using the single sign-on from your Google Apps credentials. A couple of notes on activating and the MX record changes. If you're using Google Apps Premier Edition, you've got anywhere from 1 to 7 MX entries associated with the Google Apps mail servers. You want to remove those and replace them with the Google Message Security MX entries. There's little or no concern here about changing MX records and disruption of service, since your mail records are currently pointing to Google. Now they're going to point to Postini, which will in turn automatically pass that mail on to Google. So, you know, even if there's propagation and some people are still sending mail through Google Apps MX records, eventually it's all going to end up in the same place. There are a couple of final steps we'll talk about that you want to wait a little bit for any propagation. But again, if you have the opportunity to reduce the TTL settings to a lower number, this process will not take long. Typically, there are 4 MX records for the service. It's the client's domain and where it says S#A1, A2, B1, B2, depends on the system. The wizard will be providing you with the appropriate system number. So typically for Google Apps Premier Edition, it's system 9, so it would be S9A1.psmtp.com. Those 4 entries will should be entered and will propagate. The ability to set priorities, the traditional settings were to just number those in the order they're listed there, 10, 20, 30, 40, or 1, 2, 3, 4, or depending upon who your registrar is, whatever they let you do. You know, some are high, medium, and low. Just match that up so the first one is there. Current thinking, you might actually start to see it, is that they can all be the same preference value. Either way, you're in good shape with either of those options. Excuse me. Within the cPanel for your Google Apps account, there are some settings which you want to follow up on after the service has been provisioned and propagation has occurred. And it's important to note that these settings are part of the differentiator between Standard Edition and Premier Edition, in that they allow you to specify inbound and outbound gateways for your service. That's not a feature that's available in Standard Edition. As part of the activation wizard, the outbound gateway of your email settings, which is available either by email in the control panel or clicking on service settings and then going to email. Outbound gateway is set automatically. Inbound gateway is left blank because Postini is automatically pointing to you, and that allows for, as I mentioned earlier, mail to come in if it's still in the process of propagating in a variety of methods. After it's set, you want to set the inbound gateway to the series of IP addresses that correspond to Postini servers, and that will help to eventually narrow down people being able to target or send mail directly to Google services, which is what you want, especially if you're implementing customized rules and mail filtering and/or Google Message Discovery on the client side. There's an option which I'll show on the next screen as it comes up to limit delivery from Postini services or limit delivery to the inbound gateway. And once you're sure that propagation has occurred, you want to check that box off. And that will basically limit the ability for inbound mail to be received from any sending domain other than the range of IP addresses listed in the inbound gateway. There is an additional option under the email settings for email whitelisting. And this is kind of important for handshaking between the spam filter of Gmail and the spam filters in Postini. And what this basically does is to say that Google spam filtering should not apply for mail coming from these specific whitelisted IPs. Basically acknowledging that if Postini is in front of Google Apps and it's filtering all the mail, you don't want mail that's filtered and delivered through Postini to be in turn caught in the Gmail spam filter. So you enable that by whitelisting the IP range, and that's again the same range here is the one for System 9. The other addresses listed up above, 6418 and 207.126, are for other Postini services, other Postini systems throughout the world. Excuse me. This might be a little tough to see, but I just wanted to, with respect to the last discussion, these are the 4 entries in the control panel under email. Email whitelist, outbound gateway, and inbound gateway. Stuck in the middle there is email routing, which is not something that you're interested in at the moment. As I mentioned, outbound gateway is set automatically. You can see that it's usually going to be outbound s9.obsmtp.com, or it might be outbound s9.ga for Google Apps.obsmtp.com. That links and ensures that all mail leaving Google Apps or your Gmail interface for your clients is going out through the Postini service. And we'll look at why that's important. Again, the inbound gateway and the box at the bottom to restrict mail only to be received from Postini servers. A couple of best practices when you're configuring these services.
Actually, there's a question related to that.
Yeah, please.
About limiting delivery when you have a website that sends auto-generated messages.
Limiting delivery, I'm sorry, where are we here?
If you limit delivery from the Postini service, to restrict it to only be from the Postini services, and you have a website that auto-generates emails, will you not be able to receive those emails from the website?
It depends on the methodology used by your website for sending mail. If it's using, if it's doing a traditional SMTP lookup, it's going to realize that mail should go to Postini and be delivered on through the service. If perhaps an older practice, a website is specifically sending mail to an IP address, then yes, you need to account for that either by allowing that IP address to deliver mail or finding a way to update your mail server to use the appropriate email engine and point that mail through Postini if you want it to be filtered. And chances are you do in that case, because often spammers and bots will automatically fill out a form from a website that might generate as much spam as legitimate, if not more than legitimate mail coming from that. So some other best practices. Gmail has the opportunity, and certainly if you're upgrading somebody from Standard Edition, this is a very common thing that we see in Standard Edition accounts, is they create a catch-all account, a feature of Gmail. We highly recommend you don't do that, not just because of Postini. We just think it just enables spam. So use nicknames or aliases as appropriate to account for legitimate variations, whether it be spelling alternations or info at accounts or contact us accounts or whatever, rather than creating a catch-all. You may want to consider an SPF record, Sender Policy Framework, which is an upcoming, still in the works and highly disputed, but actually a very effective methodology for limiting spammers by validating where a domain can send mail from. So if you're using Postini services, your mail is going to be coming from both Google and Postini in terms of evaluating how the message flow works. You'll want to perhaps consider an SPF record that includes both of those things. But you want to be careful and research your customers' requirements if they use another mailing service, an outside service like Vertical Response or Constant Contact or Salesforce.com. You'll want to consider including those in an SPF definition as well, so that your mail, both inside and outside, does not get caught and does not put your client on a real-time blacklist. Another recommendation is not to, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but don't whitelist or don't add any approved senders where your domain is part of the address. We find, on a lot of our Postini direct clients where they call us and say mail's getting through, it's because they thought they were doing the right thing by whitelisting their own address or whitelisting a coworker or whitelisting their entire domain. And one of the most common spam techniques these days is to use the sender address as being the same as the recipient address so that it looks like you might have sent yourself something and spam it as a methodology for getting by spam filters. So recommend highly that you don't do that. It's something that we would do as part of training the users and education process, and can go a long way to reducing spam that gets through and proving the value of the service. Within the Postini console, there is an additional level of structure to review. There's an administrator level and a user level created by the activation wizard. Administrator will be the administrator within Google Apps. You can elevate others to be administrators through authorization rights. And then there's a user org. And the structure allows for a default representation of capabilities and permissions. You can establish, once your account is created, you can establish other organizations or sub-orgs and put users into those. And that's a methodology for defining different filtering characteristics by a group. It would be higher sensitivity for financial folks, less sensitivity for IT folks who might need, things that be more mailing list oriented or whatever. You can define and work with that structure. There is a default user, traditionally called pdefault, and it defines the characteristics for all new users that are created in terms of filtering sensitivity, in terms of overall settings for time zone and so on. And you can modify that so that any new user that's created will be updated to those standards. You can actually also reset a user, which will pull the settings from the pdefault and apply them to existing users. Other opportunities in the control are to reset the time zone. So if you've got people in different time zones, you want to make sure that the overall time zone for the organization is set correctly, and then individual users are set correctly. It's actually something later on that users can do as well. We have a question. We have a question about how do you prevent whitelisting their domain? Is there a policy you can set? Actually, no. There are a variety of techniques here. There's nothing that you can do to prevent an administrator from doing that. I'm sorry. You can actually stop a user through permissions from being able to manage their own individual approved centers and block centers by limiting their access to the capabilities of the message center, which we'll demonstrate a little bit later. Excuse me. Inbound options. So within the within the Postini Services control panel, there are sections of the organizational structure for inbound services, outbound services, and user settings. Inbound services allow you to define the characteristics for the elements you see on the screen here: spam filtering, virus blocking, and so on. Just briefly, the spam filtering that Postini provides, the traditional setup works in three methodologies. Spam is evaluated through the spam filtering engine, and blatant spam is a feature of the service. It's provisioned with blatant spam blocking turned on, and traditionally it is black-holed or thrown away. This is one of the huge values of Postini's being on the edge and processing the amount of mail that they do. They're able to recognize the large bot traffic and basically clobber and remove from the network large volumes of mail that is obvious spam. Other mail is either then decided on a basis of scoring, whether it's delivered to the inbox or whether it's placed in the user quarantine. And the user quarantine, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is the differentiation between the inbox and the quarantine is based on the filtering sensitivity, which is set as a default but can be adjusted on a per user by user basis or on an org by org basis. Virus blocking is a part of this service, and there are a bunch of settings here. Traditionally, you would set virus blocking to bounce the message, but you can actually let it be quarantined. It's not something that they can download, but they can see that they got a virus from somebody just in case they want to track that as well. And you get notified of those if you want, so on. Some higher level services are in place here. You have Attachment Manager, which allows you to define filtering based on properties of attachments, including everything from size to extension. So if you wanted to filter out music files, you can do that. You can force them to be quarantined. You can have them deleted. You can have them bounced. You can redirect them to an administrator. There are a variety of options you can do there. Additionally, if you find that you are the target, your client is the target of a some nefarious spammer who's focusing on those folks, you can actually write your own content filtering rules and take action upon those messages, including, again, much like Attachment Manager, you can bounce the messages, you can delete them, you can redirect them, you can force them to quarantine. Or on the positive side, if you're finding things that are being trapped, you can write content filters to address perhaps things like mail coming from a website that you don't want to ever be filtered, registration sign-ups or things like that. You can write content filter rules to make sure those are never placed in quarantine. One little footnote here: if you're working with Postini Services, most of you are probably aware that Google recently increased the attachment size to 25 megabytes. I'm not sure if it's been fixed yet, but there is, in Attachment Manager, there is a setting there that's usually set to 20. If it's not fixed and setting it to 25 yet, you can make that change yourself and make sure that a newly accepted size attachment does not get caught in quarantine. One other option under inbound services is the ability to set approved or block senders for all users, so at the enterprise level. Just a quick note on that, the hierarchy is that a user's settings for approved and blocked senders take precedence over corporate-wide, but if you wanted to set an approved sender for all users, instead of having to do it on an individual basis, you can do it for the entire organization. Is there a question?
About default settings. The question is, can we talk about the default settings? Are they configured in such a manner as to provide adequate filtering by default? In our experience, for Postini Services within Google Apps Premier Edition, the filters, the spam filters that you set on a scale of 1 to 5 are generally set at ones or ones and twos. Typically, on our implementations, we tend to increase those up to 4 or 5. We don't see an increase in false positives, valid messages that are getting caught in quarantine, but it increases the power of the filtering, and you'll have significantly less email passing through the Postini Services and ending up in your spam folder because of the Gmail spam filters.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay. I'm sorry, there's a question of what is a suborg. A feature of the service is the ability to divide your user groups or your user community into groups, or what they call orgs or suborgs. You're able to create a suborg keeping all of the properties of the parent org, if you will, and then move users between those. Why would you do something like that? Again, it's an opportunity to have a subset of users whose settings are slightly different or perhaps grossly different than another group of users. It can be as simple as different notification times for quarantine summaries, which we'll talk about. It can be something that differentiates the filtering sensitivity. It can be purely cosmetic, to divide your groups, your users by department, so that it's easier for you to manage them. It's really a lot of power. The default setting is fine. Administrators and users, will work the majority of the time. But if you need to set differentiating characteristics, you have the ability to do that by creating suborganizations. Okay. Another differentiator, if you choose to do this, and it's optional, but as a default it is set up, is the ability to set and control notifications to your users. So as an administrator, you can set the delivery time. There's some things to consider here. If you're going to traditionally, you would get a notification summary of what was placed in the quarantine in the last 24 hours. So the service is trying to tell you that you have these messages placed in quarantine, and we'll talk about what that notification looks like. But you can set that time for your users. And traditionally, for our Postini clients, we set it for 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's the majority of mail during the day that might have been quarantined. It's before they leave. They can look through it and say, yes. Well, we've got clients that say, I want to get it when I come back from lunch, so set it at 1, and that'll cover everything in the morning. I've got clients who want it to be in the morning. I've got clients who want some users to have it at 4 and some users to have it first thing in the morning. So we set up organizations to deal with it that way, and you have that control. You also have control over the format and functionality of the daily notification. And the next slide, we're going to show you what that notification looks like and what some of the links are on that email. So you have some control here as to how the service communicates with your users. You can elect to not notify your users. In the extreme case, and we don't recommend this, our recommendation is that you let users take responsibility for managing their spam. But if you've got clients who don't want to be involved in that, you can turn off the notification. You can redirect all of the quarantine to an administrator and let the administrator be responsible. I wouldn't want to be that person, but you could do that. So there's a lot of flexibility there. There are notifications for other features of the service. Most of them are turned off as part of the relationship with Google Apps Premier Edition. But the attachment manager, if you're going to set attachment manager rules, you might decide that you want to send a notification to the user if something triggers an attachment manager rule. And that happens both on the inbound and the outbound side. You can see that on the screen, virus notifications by rule, by default in the activation wizard are turned off. But if you wanted a user to know that, or if you wanted an administrator to know that, depending on how you configure the service, it's easy to make that happen. Excuse me. This is a sample of a daily quarantine email to me a couple of days ago, so it's real. And there are a couple of things to point out here. The user will get this email sent to them, and there are some active links, things that you can actually configure, but typically, as a default, there are 3 active links here. If a user sees a message listed in the daily quarantine and they say, I want that message, they can click on Deliver, and that message will be delivered from Postini to their inbox immediately. If they want to see what that message is without delivering it, they can click on the message subject, and they'll be led to another browser window into the Postini Message Center where they are presented with that message and can decide again to deliver it and or take other actions. The other actions, the third link there is above the gray line, the Message Center link, which will take you into the Message Center as a user and allow you to look at your mail that's been quarantined. The mail is held in quarantine for 2 weeks, and after that it's deleted. It's not a requirement of the user to clean up their quarantine, so it's not another administrative task. And I got to tell you that most of our users never spend time worrying about this, so it's time gained back in the day. Excuse me. So the Message Center is a place where the user can come in and change their own sensitivity levels. Again, if you want them to be able to do that, and as a rule they can do that, so they can increase the sensitivity. They can maintain their own approved senders and block senders, and they can do that on the basis of an entire email address, which is a recommendation. They can They can whitelist or block an entire domain if they choose to. And you can also set approved distribution lists. So if you are the recipient of a daily newsletter that's getting caught as spam, you can add that in, and if you're blind carbon copied on it, it won't get quarantined if you add that and maintain that as a list. You want to be careful about that one as a way, especially if you're using something inside your domain, that you don't allow that to let spoofed mail come through. Another real value add for this service, and something that you won't get out of the great Google Apps mail service, which I think we all love and benefit from, but having Postini on the front edge of this, managing inbound and outbound mail, it tracks tremendous amounts of data on inbound and outbound traffic and provides you about 40 days of history. We provide our clients with monthly reports of traffic to help them see, one, how the service is doing, and isolate and determine if there are issues which need to be addressed. But you have the opportunity for traffic reports at a recipient level, at a domain level, specific spam filtering, virus filtering. All of the services have information retained about them and can be delivered in reports, including, if you're using Google Message Discovery, how messages are being archived, again, at the domain and account level. You have that on the outbound side as well, and there's a tremendous amount of power here. We do enough conversions of Google Apps clients who are not familiar with this capability, and you turn around and show them some of the reporting that you get out of this, and it's interesting information, and it's often good triage work if they're having some problems. On the next slide, I have a sample report of, and hopefully you can read some of this. Here is just an email inbound traffic report by recipient for the first 14 days of this month. And the service provides this information. It's very quick. Provides this information in descending order of message volume. You can download this as a CSV file and manipulate it, send it on to clients, and you can do that with any of these reports. The information you get here, at least on the traffic report, tends to provide you with volume in terms of quantity of messages and size of messages, and gives you a breakdown of what was delivered, what was blocked, and what was quarantined. So just briefly looking here, you can see that the service blatant spam, the blocked section in the middle there, was 43% of our messages for the month so far. 31% are delivered directly to the inbox, and 24% are quarantined. As a reseller, another opportunity for you to value add for this service is user education. And certainly explaining about the daily quarantine, talking about the message center link and how to adjust your settings. The user doesn't have to wait for the daily quarantine summary. What if they think something got quarantined and they're not going to get their quarantine summary until later in the day? You can log in Postini.com, and because you're in single sign-on as a Gabe customer, it's your email address and your Google Apps password. And you get to the message center just as if you clicked on that message center link in the daily quarantine summary. You can educate your users about the deliver link and what that means. Now, I'll address probably a question that many of you might have, or you'll certainly get from your clients as they begin to use this. One is, can I add approved or blocked senders from the daily quarantine summary? And the answer is no. There are some security issues with being able to do that. You have to get to the message center to be able to manage that. So you can only deliver a message, but you'd have to, if you wanted to approve that sender to prevent it from being caught in the quarantine, again, you need to go into the message center and deliver from there and add it as an approved sender, or manage your settings and manually add that as an approved sender. Very easy to do. And to that end, there is a quick start guide provided by Google. It's a 3-page PDF that is typical part of our deployment to our users, which talks about how to manage your mail, how to access the message center, how to change your settings, and the effects of that. So the users have the ability to control a lot of that, and you know, it's as it should be. Again, if your clients don't want to do that, you do have the ability to restrict some of these capabilities or hide them entirely. Winding down for just a couple of things. If you're in the point of troubleshooting with GMS, you have some opportunities. You have certainly the Google Apps Help Forum, of which there are a number of Postini resellers and Google Apps resellers who support that site, we being one of them. There are many who come in and just try and help out folks so that, again, we can demystify that. If you're receiving mail, you know, the Message Header Analyzer is a publicly available tool that helps you analyze how a message was delivered, how it went through Postini, and how it was processed. And then through your Google Apps Control Panel, there is a link to support related to Postini Services, which provides both the link to the Admin Help Center and contact information via email and phone for Premier Edition clients. So, Alan, were there any questions related to GMS before we move on and just cover GMD?
The question just came in here from Peter about configuration where users have their own whitelists and blacklists versus the enterprise-wide ones. Can you talk a little bit to how that generally gets managed?
There are a variety of tools to support the ingest of that. One of the services that we provide, again, as a Postini reseller, you know, if we're provided that information, whether it be by a text file or, you know, extracting it from some other service, we can either work with a client to show them how to manually do that themselves if they want, or we will provide that service using a batch command feature of Postini, which allows you to stage and submit a text file in a predefined format that adds approved senders. And you can do that on the organization-wide level, or you can do it on the per-user level. We use that feature quite a bit if we're transferring an account where we extract all of the settings to help simplify the setup on the other side. Okay. We'll take Google Message Discovery.
Okay. So a little bit about Google Message Discovery, and there have been some questions about how that works with Google Apps in general. So Google Message Discovery includes Google Message Security, which are the Postini services included within Google Apps Premier Edition. Because of that, if you're adding Google Message Discovery, it's an external service to Premier Edition, you can't have the internal Postini services running. The other thing to realize is that if all you need is spam and the spam and virus protection, when you activate Postini services, that's integrated. If you add a user if you have another Google App Premier Edition user account, the user's automatically added into the spam and virus protection. If you're working instead with Google Apps Premier Edition and Message Discovery, it's not yet integrated. And therefore, when you add or remove users from Google Apps, you'll also need to go in and add or remove them from the Message Discovery tools that are there as well. A couple of folks have asked about purchasing Message Discovery, and there are a couple of different ways. And how you decide to purchase or make it available to your customers really sort of depends on your business model as a Google Apps reseller and how much activity you think you're going to do with the size of your customer. Your customers can always purchase Message Discovery direct or using their identity with their permission. You could do it on their behalf. Note that with Google Postini Services, support doesn't kick in until there's a $1,500 minimum spend. And so for smaller customers, the support that comes from the Google Postini team really won't be there. You'll be limited to the forums unless you hit that threshold. The other thing to know is that Google support is predominantly aimed at administrators. And so if you're looking for a broader level of support, or your customers want end user support, they want to be able to call someone up and say, can you add this user for me? We call that outsourced administration. Then you're probably looking at working with one of the Google Postini resellers. Now, as we mentioned, Horizon is one of many, and I've yet to bump into a bad Google Postini reseller, so they're all good, but there are a couple of options there. If you feel that you're going to be doing a lot of work with message discovery, test your data out in the West Coast and Excel Micro in the Midwest, our authorized Postini distributors, they can set you up with the ability to resell Google Postini Services, both message security and message discovery. Both of them do have minimum dollar commitments and minimum account sizes you need to address and see if that fits your business model. Horizon and many other resellers will bundle message discovery and offer setup and support services, and others as well as ourselves will do a recurring annual revenue share with you as a referring partner. And so we have a program that if you're looking to offer message discovery, you're not at this point interested in making the commitments necessary to become a reseller of Postini Services. We have a way to do it where we can share the revenue and provide that service to your customer.
Thank you. I think we're through the planned presentation, and probably, Michelle, I'm sorry we went a little long there, but want to certainly give some time to Q&A. We've done a little as we've gone along, but welcome your questions, and let's see if we can try and get to them.
Okay. I'm going to go back and cover some of the questions that we answered earlier in the Q&A session that we think are very pertinent to everyone here, and then there's some new questions that have come in. Someone asked about the pricing for message discovery. When purchasing direct from Google, there's a list price of $25 per user per year if you only need 1 year retention. If the customer needs extended retention, which is anything up to 10 years, it's $45 per user per year. There is no limit on space. There's no additional charge for the volume of mail that's archived. It's strictly whether you want 1 year or up to 10. As a Postini Services reseller, we always work to direct customers to the extended retention, in that if they sign up for 1 year retention and at some point decide they want it longer, to do that you need to re-provision the service. It's a major inconvenience. It's a lot of work. It makes things unnecessarily complex. The question is, are Google Apps accounts synchronized with the Postini login? When you're using Postini Services within Google Apps, they are synchronized, username and password. They can access, as Chris mentioned, they can access the message center from the subject line of the message or the message center link in the quarantine summary, or by logging in directly to the Postini portal.
And just to add to that, I probably didn't touch on that enough, that just to highlight that, as a service through Google Apps, Postini Services is fully synchronized. So when you provision another user in your Google Apps account, if you've got Postini active, that user is added. If you add a nickname to a user, that synchronization happens. All of that's working in the background, and it's part of the integration between those services.
Alan and Chris, I just want to interrupt quickly. We have about 4 minutes left, and I know there's a number of questions, so just a time check.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, excellent. How much time does it take to set up and configure message discovery for an organization? If you have full access to the DNS capabilities, it generally takes 48 to 72 hours to run through the activation, the MX record changes, and then authorization for the administrative account, the administrative access to the quarantine. It certainly can be done faster than that.
Yeah, I think that the larger aspect of the timeline is really the MX propagation. Activating the service, provisioning it, and getting the user set up is relatively straightforward. Pulling the switch on the MX records is the longer time frame issue.
Okay. Are you able to access quarantine emails through Google Apps inbox? As we mentioned, Google Postini Services will send a daily quarantine summary that ends up in your inbox. You can access the quarantine emails through there. Quarantine emails will not show up in your inbox, and they will not show up in the spam label of your All Mail folder within Google Apps. Okay. Someone's asking, is Postini really targeting clients with 25 PC users or more? I would say no. A substantial part of our business is financial advisors and small brokerage companies and investment advisors with 1 to 5 people. They need the archive. They want the spam filtering. They want to set up outbound so the compliance filters are in order. There's definitely need for both the Postini services within Google Apps Premier Edition, in many cases, message discovery as well. Okay. Someone asked, what are the frequent pitfalls of the installation process for the Postini services? Chris, I don't know if you want to answer that one.
No, I think if you're doing it through the Gate Control Panel, it's pretty straightforward. If you've got an established Gate account, and you obviously, if you've got DNS access, you're 99% there. The wizard is very steadfast. Any concerns about domain conflicts or anything like that have been worked out long ago. So I think I really don't think, other than MX access, DNS access, I don't think there's many challenges.
Okay, there's some other questions here. What I'd like to do is focus on questions that are more related to Postini services within Google Apps. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions here, we're happy to put together an FAQ document and distribute it back to the team. Additionally, if anyone wants to contact us offline, you have our email addresses in the presentation as well.
And we love to talk about the service.
One of the questions is there a minimum number of users we need to sign up for GMS? Is there a minimum dollar amount? The answer there is no. If you're reselling Google Apps, you get message security as a service, an additional service. When you activate it, it will cover all of the mailboxes in your Google Apps account. If you are adding GMS to an internal mail server or you're using GMD in association with Gate, again, we'll support accounts as few as 1. The distributors have some minimums. You would need to check with them on those. But there is no dollar requirement for setting up those services.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We're coming up on 11 o'clock, and we want to respect everyone's time. As Alan and Chris just mentioned, we will follow up, either Horizon or one of our program managers will follow up with everyone offline for the remaining questions. Alan and Chris, I just want to thank you both. This was, I think, invaluable information for all of our resellers. And I hope everyone found it useful. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to present to everyone today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Happy to give back.
Great. And everyone will notice that Chris and Alan's email addresses are both on the second slide of this presentation, and we'll be posting that information on the solution provider site as well, so you can get in touch with them if you have any other questions specifically for them, or if you just want to follow up about working with them in the future. So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll be on for another few minutes to take any other questions, and then we'll be signing out. And thanks again, Alan and Chris.
My pleasure.